Okay, folks, we get settled. Of course, I'm preaching to the choir in here because the people who aren't settled are the ones who are still grabbing their snack. I've discovered doing conferences over the years that the only way to make sure to have a half-hour break is to announce a 20-minute break, but I shouldn't have given that secret away. Here we are. We want to keep going because we have some wonderful speakers here this morning, and we want to continue unrolling this very exciting program. Our next speaker is Mark DiDomenico. Earlier, Kelly and I presented a visual and anecdotal report on whole grain momentum, but Mark is the person who has the real numbers behind it. We were saying, oh, isn't this cool? Look at this one, look at that one. Mark looks at 7,000, is it, Mark, menus across the entire sector and tells you what's really going on, who's menuing this, who's menuing that, what has changed, what has increased, and so forth. And Mark is Director of Client Solutions at Datassential, a leading insights provider for the food service industry. And he's going to tell us about some of the key trends his company has identified about whole grain items that are getting on the menu and what's happening with them. So I will sit down and let Mark take over.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if the clicker's up here.
Yep, here it is.
Oh.
If you start wandering, if you can stay kind of in the sections of it.
Okay. Maybe I'll just stand up here if that's all right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Cynthia, for that introduction, and thanks for having me. We're very excited to be here. As you can see, we're going to talk about trending grains, and I think it's in the program, but that's when we got the call, they want to know what's the next quinoa, right? So hopefully we'll address that, and we'll talk to it a little bit about our company. Datassential is a market research provider. We focus almost primarily, solely, I should say, on the food service industry, but we do food overall, and we've got a couple of different services that we're going to highlight today, some data from. So we'll get into some of those sources. First and foremost is data from our menu trends database. As Cynthia talked about, we've got a database. We've literally got thousands of menus, over 7,000 at this point, that we look at. And we've got two measures that we'll be talking about today. Number one is penetration. That's mostly the one that we're going to be talking about. And that's our measure of adoption, right? So all it's going to tell you is the percent of restaurants that are featuring a particular item. In this case, we'll be talking about grains, obviously. And then we also have incidence, which is the percent of menu items. So it's more like a share. So what share of items does that take up? But again, we'll be mostly dealing with penetration. So here's the example. Chicken is on 96% of menus and accounts for 11% of dishes overall. Okay? In that database, we've got the segmentation broken down this way. You'll hear me talk about a couple of these. So QSR restaurants are your traditional QSRs, and Cynthia and Kelly kind of talked about some of this, versus fast casual, which is your higher-end fast food, if you will, or limited service restaurant sector. And then we go into full service restaurants, and those are broken out into three different breaks. Mid-scale, which is your family style restaurants. Casual dining, your traditional casual dining players, although we do have upper casual as well classified. And those would be places like Cheesecake Factory and P.F. Chang's. And then last but not least, of course, is fine dining, which is your white tablecloth locations. In the menu trends database, and this is an important thing for us to remember, we don't just look at the chains, although that's how we've got them listed out here for examples, but the database is split 50-50 between chains and independents. And that's very important because the independent food service operators, especially in the commercial side, are far more likely to experiment, try new things, and bring new innovative products to their consumers. And I think that's why we pay as much attention to those guys as we do the chain restaurants. We also have some data today from a service that we call Scores. And what Scores does is it takes a look at all of the new items and limited time offers that the chains put onto their menus. So this one does look at just chain items. But what we do is we take those items and we essentially concept test them with consumers. So we'll put them in front of a consumer in a survey, and we'll ask them things like purchase intent, right? Oops, I think I went the wrong way on that one. Wrong button. Purchase intent, would you order this item? How unique is it? Is this something that you would order more often? Is this something that you would go to a restaurant specifically for? And do you think this is a good value? So we've got all those measures. Again, for sake here, we're going to focus on purchase intent, and we'll explain that a little bit more when we get there. One of the things that we get asked about, and we get asked about quite a bit, in fact, that's one of the reasons why we're here, is what's coming down the pike, right? What are the next food trends that we're supposed to be seeing and thinking about as we go out into the marketplace? And we have a methodology that we've built to help us identify what trends are circulating through. We call it our menu adoption cycle. You'll hear us call it the MAC for short. And it's our algorithm for how we analyze trends and identify where they are in their life cycle. So first and foremost, we'll start off down here at the inception stage. That's really the first place. When we start to see items growing in penetration, getting some groundswell, if you will, among fine dining restaurants and some of those authentic, ethnic, independent restaurants, we'll put that into inception, right? So those are going to be really new, interesting items, very innovative dishes that you might not see anyplace else. If we start to see some growth there, some increasing penetration rates, so more chefs are bringing them in, we'll put that into inception. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work its way all the way through. The example we use there is always bone marrow. Anyone having a dish with bone marrow in it? This is a whole grain audience, so I have to, when I talk about proteins with the whole grain people, I got to make sure I read my audience. But bone marrow is a great example, inception level item, probably not going to end up on the menu at McDonald's anytime soon, right? So, but it's something that when we start to see that growth in the inception, we keep an eye on it. When we start to see then those items growing on these types of places, so fast casual restaurants and some casual dining independent restaurants, then we move it into adoption, right? That just simply means more operators are adopting those particular items or flavors or ingredients on their menus, and it's a little bit further down the chain, still relatively new and exciting, but definitely where we're seeing all of the action now, right? When we talk to our operators, maybe 10, 15 years ago, we would tell a lot of folks that you want to focus in on that next stage, which is proliferation, right, where things are much, much more popular. Now operators are looking for adoption-level items. And that's very important because, again, this is where all the action is, so we're going to pay some attention to items there. Once those items then get picked up by the chains, casual dining chains, quick service chains, we move it into proliferation. Far more popular. It's got a broad consumer audience. People understand it. It's not mysterious. So it's definitely become more mainstream. And then last but not least, in ubiquity, you have family dining restaurants, school cafeterias. And for us, if it ends up on the menu at Denny's, then it's kind of worked its way all the way through. Nothing against Denny's. Because what we say with ubiquity is it doesn't necessarily mean that item is going away, right? Bacon is in ubiquity. I don't think bacon's coming off the menu anytime soon. So, there are things that have been in decline that are in ubiquity, but for the most part, you just have items that have kind of peaked in their popularity, probably aren't going to grow too much further, but certainly aren't going anywhere. So that's the MAC, and we're able to then analyze trends in a particular category and place items along that curve. And this is typically how we visualize this. So we start off in inception, adoption, proliferation, and ubiquity. So that's roughly equivalent to their penetration on menus and overall popularity. There's a little bit of art and science that we do when we build the MACs. So this is what we have for what we call the ancient grains, right? So you can see everything that, and I don't need to go through a lot of these, obviously, in this particular audience, because I think everybody here knows what Amaranth is, and Freekeh, and Teff. But right now, we've got these grains in inception, and you can see in adoption, and again, these are all based on what we're seeing on menus at restaurants. So again, I think everybody here is very familiar with these items, and they're not necessarily new to you. And certainly Amaranth and black rice and millet have been around for a long time, of course. But we're starting to see that growth on menus, and that's why we're putting, we have them in the inception cycle. Likewise, for adoption, we're seeing even more growth. In proliferation, we have things like steel-cut oats. Quinoa is here in proliferation. So again, the question, what's the next quinoa? Good question, because quinoa is already in proliferation, right? And then last but not least, you have things like cornmeal, oats, and rye and wheat in the ubiquity phase. So if we put this up on a graph, ancient grains, top menu and trending. So this is one of my favorite analyses that we do, which is what we call top and fastest growing, right? So here's the stuff that's top on menus: corn, rice, wheat, rye, all the major characters, right? And then here's the stuff that's growing, right? Top trending. So number one is chia seeds. And I know we haven't had too much conversation about chia seeds, and I've got some examples in here. Let me know if I'm out of bounds on that, but otherwise you can see all the other players that have been mentioned so far in terms of what's trending. So why are these things trending? And it's driven a lot, of course, obviously by consumer demand. We've had a number of folks talking about what consumers are looking for. They're trying to eat healthier. And so we've got some data around that, right? So what are consumers looking to include more in their diet? Vegetables, fruits, fiber, and you can see whole grain. So we've got that first couple of buckets there that we've grouped together. But protein, nuts and seeds, and whole grains are all pretty close together, pretty high in demand, right, from consumers. They know that they're looking to increase these particular items in their diet for a healthier lifestyle. And why? So we're looking at motivators for this kind of stuff. This is a very extensive list. There's a lot of items on this list. I only cut off the top 10 here. But I did this for a reason, because I think those top 3 really speak volumes to why whole grains and ancient grains are more and more popular, because people understand, right? Heart health, whole grain has had that message for quite some time. And of course, if you have a healthy heart, you live longer. And then more importantly, though, I think, is the sustained energy for the day. So on menus, we've seen an exponential increase in the mentions of protein, just the word protein on menus. So more and more food service operators are calling out the protein content of their meals as a way to speak to the consumer demand for more energy. Consumers equate that with energy and sustenance and the ability to keep me going and fuel me through the day. And we see that here, that's what consumers are looking for. And I think that's something to think about when you have, when you're trying to menu or create dishes around quinoa and amaranth and all the other grains, is what does it do for you? What does it provide to the body? Protein and all the other good things that come out of it, I think are very, very important things to call out because that's the kind of stuff that consumers are looking for. So really quickly here, this is penetration by segment, and I won't go too much into this, but you can see overall, there's a very, very high penetration for wheat and rye. And I know these numbers might not look huge, but if you think about it, we're tracking thousands of menus. There's very few things that show up on 90% of menus like chicken, right? Chicken is chicken. But when you start seeing call-outs for quinoa or brown rice, and they're closing in on 10%, that's a big, big number for us. Small penetration rates, and you'll see that on the next slide, even the small ones, around 1 or 2%, still are meaningful to us because we see millions of items actually that we track all the time. So if you see something on 8.8% of menus, that's a big deal. Quinoa certainly is a big deal. So when the first question that came to us is, what's the next quinoa? Well, geez, quinoa's the next quinoa. It's still growing. It's not going anywhere. So I don't know that we necessarily have to worry too much about what's coming behind it, but certainly there's some good selections on this list. Brown rice is even more penetrated than quinoa and still growing. Farro is something that we'll point to some examples later. I do have more data here. So again, now we're starting to see some smaller penetration items. Sorghum on the list, very, very strong growth, I should say, but small penetration rate. So again, it's a good way to look at the information to understand small numbers, yes, pretty solid growth. Again, does that mean that sorghum's going to end up on the menu at McDonald's? Probably not. Maybe. Who knows? It's kind of early to tell there, but certainly some of the ones on the previous slide we're going to start to see. One of the other ones, like I say, we have Acai on the list as well, so we'll talk through some of those examples. So I love the fact that I was able to sit in on some of the earlier presentations and hear some of those questions, because I know this one came up. Who's interested in this, right? Is this predominantly geared towards women or men? And I think Kelly actually answered the question, and we would validate that. It was perfect. So really not much of a skew, male or female, right? So just as many males are as interested in ancient grains as female. A little bit of a generational skew, right? Definitely skews for younger consumers, millennials. And look at the skew, and I know there's another question for Hispanic consumers, and definitely a pretty solid skew for Hispanics. And in our survey, we had a pretty decent sample size for that, so that was pretty important. Obviously, folks who are following a strict diet, much higher interest in ancient grains. And then I love this group down here, not concerned at all with what I eat, very, very uninterested in ancient grains. We all know who that is, right? And then, of course, you can see regional, not too much of a regional skew. I would have expected a little bit higher skew in the West, but really not. It's actually the highest numbers in the Midwest, but those are essentially flat. So we can look at it demographically and kind of pinpoint, where you want to play. And then, so interest in specialty grains, just overall, the percentage of folks who say they love it. And then I just look at this chart this way, the folks who love it, and then the folks who say they want to avoid it. The good news is that, it takes a while for to go down the list before the avoidance gets bigger. You get down to how many. Gets down to where the avoids are bigger than the loves. But quinoa is certainly a little bit higher than the middle of the list. So again, still pretty interested. But again, a smaller portion of the consumer base is going to be interested in some of the ancient grains that we're talking about. And I think it's strictly because of the fact that people aren't aware, right? And some of these things are Amaranth, is not a household name. So I think there's some education opportunities to bring people along into what those grains can do. So again, quinoa, we're gonna use that as our base. We've got quinoa firmly in proliferation. I've got the explanation here. This is just straight out of our database, out of our portal called Snap, that you can come in and we do a lot of work with a lot of different manufacturers and food service operators, and we provide a great resource, I think, for education for folks. And in this group, I don't think we necessarily have to kind of go through what quinoa is, but just know that we've got it about 9% of menus, 350% menu item penetration growth over 4 years. I think what mostly I'd like you to focus in on is the applications, right? And we talked about it. Somebody asked the question earlier too, is it just something on salads? Well, it is a lot on salads, but you can see a couple of different applications that we have here. Of course, we do have a salad example. We've got the quinoa burger, so a lot of veggie burgers are incorporating quinoa in there because of the taste and protein profile there. Barbecue bowl. So you can have it not just in vegetarian dishes, but here it is alongside barbecue beef. So there's a lot of different applications for it, and I think that's going to be very important as you approach the food service industry, is being able to identify ways that you can utilize these particular grains. So again, here's just a breakdown of the different types of applications that we see for quinoa, and you can see there's a multitude of them. Granted, the biggest ones here are in salads, appetizers, and entree salads, but then you've got rice dishes, so on and so forth. So there's quite a few. And I do have the example here, and I started chuckling in the back of the room when Kelly and Cynthia showed the Power Mediterranean chicken salad. I'm like, they stole my example. But I've got some consumer data behind it, though. So this is from our scores database. So this is where we actually, when this item was launched, we put it out in a survey, and we asked consumers, is this something, are you interested in buying this? So we call it unbranded purchase intent. So we don't let them know that it's from Wendy's. We just show them the name and the description. And then ask them, do you think this is something that you would buy? So 45% give it a top 2-box purchase intent score. May not, again, seem like high, but that's really good. As you can see, it's in the 67th percentile. So it's scored 67%, it's scored better than 67% of the items that we have in the database. And right now we're tracking well over 12,000 items in the scores database. So we've got a very, very large data set that we can compare items to. And this item compares quite well. Generally, we think that 70 percentile benchmark is where you want to be. And this item gets awfully, awfully close, so I'd still say this is really good. 67% is pretty good. Also, what's good about this item is that it's in the 67th percentile for uniqueness. And that, to us, purchase intent uniqueness designates something that's craveable, right? So people want to buy it, but they know they can only get it at this one place. So that creates that craveability for it. So we can farm through the database and identify items like that and help our customer base build those items to draw more business. So we do have Amaranth in here, gluten-free pseudo grain. I love that. I was reading up on Amaranth because I didn't know too much about it. Thankfully, we have the folks from the Menu Trends team that know all this stuff, so I don't really have to. But we've got the examples here. You can see a little bit more of a ethnic slant to some of the dishes that we're showing here, plus the oatmeal, right? So you'll see a lot of oatmeal dishes with the ancient grains in there as people kind of pile on, for flavor. But I like this last item here, Southern Range Chicken Piccata, and so it's got the amaranth flour, just to give it that gluten-free aspect. I think is definitely something that people would want to or would respond to. Again, amaranth, by the green, you can see it's in the inception phase, so it's still really, really low penetration on menus. Black rice is another one. This is one that I see would have a little bit more legs. You can see it does have a little bit higher penetration. It's on 0.6, simply because it's rice, right? People know rice. And one of the things that we talk about when we look at new items is you do have to have some element of safety. So I mentioned bone marrow before. People don't know what bone marrow is, especially if you just see a picture of it. It does not look like something that humans eat. So black rice, though, is rice, right? It looks like rice. And so I think people get it, and I think we'll start to see a little bit more penetration here, especially because of the fact that we're seeing it in more Asian cuisines, and Asian cuisines overall are growing. We're seeing more and more Asian-inspired dishes, not just at Asian-themed restaurants, but also in other non-ethnic restaurants as well. Millet is another one that we've called out here. Again, I won't go through too much of the description. Still relatively low penetration, pretty solid growth. Most common in breads or entrees, and you can see some of the examples there. Trying to be cognizant of time here. I'll keep going. Sorghum's another one, and again, we've got a few more examples of this, and I know there's a number of different applications for sorghum that we still haven't seen too much of, but I love the fact that we've got breakfast dishes, pizzas, and then some Southern cuisine. So a lot of different ways there to go. Then we're going to move into adoption. We're going to talk about barley, 3% of menus, appetizer soups and soups, entree soups, Mediterranean sandwich deli restaurants. Farro is one of the ones that I'm calling out as potential for that. What's the next quinoa? Because again, here you can see a variety of applications for it, both from the traditional bowls, charred broccoli wrap, and then of course vegan entrees as well. And so here's an example: crispy chicken salad from Brio, and you can see it calls out the Farro ingredients here. So 61st percentile in terms of purchase interest, a little bit lower on uniqueness, so it's not it's not as much of a craveable item, but still pretty solid interest among consumers. So a lot of different applications. Buckwheat is another one, 2% of menus, 9% growth. So it's been around for a little bit longer, but again, you're seeing some applications across the different menus, including breakfast, as well as some entree dishes. I have chia on the list as well, 1% of menus, well over 100% growth. This is another one that we see some good, solid growth with. And I think the last slide I have, you'll see a little bit more how important I think this can be in terms of adding the variety to the menu, because we see it across not just salads and entrees, but also beverages. And so here's a prime example of that. This is the acai berry charger smoothie. And, at some point, some of these things, we call them, it's a little like buzzword bingo, right? They're throwing as many ingredients in there as possible, and hopefully something hits. But chia seeds and flaxseed, definitely a key component of this. I think they've managed it pretty nicely here at Jamba Juice. They do a nice job. And you can see the reaction is really, really solid. So it's in the 76th percentile for purchase intent, 79th percentile for uniqueness. So when you think about these things, Jamba Juice is going to be top of mind. And that's important. You want to have that. Into proliferation, we're going to talk about brown rice, and I'm just going to kind of zip through because I know we're a little bit low on time. Brown rice, again, a lot of good veggie dishes featuring brown rice, and certainly I think they mentioned earlier Chipotle kind of popularized brown rice a little bit by putting that as an option on their line. Here's all the different applications for brown rice. And then we've got an example here as well. This is from Gordon Biersch Brewery restaurants. Chicken breast seasoned grilled glazed bourbon sauce served with brown rice pilaf, right? So, and it's got quinoa in there as well, and kale, just for good measure. You want to throw kale in there, that adds a good amount to everything. And then wild rice, same thing. We'll jump ahead into ubiquity because there's good items across the menu adoption cycle that we should be paying attention to. Cornmeal is a great example of that. Still not as highly penetrated as you might think, but that's because operators just don't necessarily call it out that much, but certainly can be called out as a whole grain and definitely carry some of those benefits. And we have seen a good deal of growth in Southern and Caribbean style restaurants. I'm sorry, not restaurants, but cuisines, right? So you can see the different applications there, and then where you'll see it on menus. So fish entrees, pizza is interesting, and then fried protein appetizers. And so here's a good example from the traditional quick service realm, Popeye's fried chicken. So they actually call out the breading on their chicken strips cornmeal. So lots of different applications there. And there's one thing that's really predictable in the scores database. We can talk about quinoa and kale till we're blue in the face, and you do get some good purchase intent there. But man, nothing works like fried food. Fried food, and I'm sorry to say, fried food and the bacon double cheeseburger are always going to score well. And then we've got oats. So again, I'll just kind of skip through here. There's nothing terribly insightful that we're going to learn here, except that again, there's room to grow for oats, and this is beyond oatmeal. So that's why if we had oatmeal on the list, obviously the penetration would be much higher. But this is oats beyond oatmeal, and so you can see where we're seeing that: parfaits, oat cakes, and then of course in the veggie burger realm. We've got rye in here as well. A little bit more penetration, obviously, just because of the sandwich deli aspect that you'll see there. But again, something very popular that if we can figure out different uses for, I think we'll have more to talk about. Whole wheat, so you notice with rye and whole wheat, we're actually seeing a decline in penetration. So we have to think about what can we replace those with to again generate the same type of draw and purchase frequency that those particular items have had in the past. So here's just some of the different applications that we're seeing for whole wheat, and whole wheat has a pretty solid versatility across the menu. So I'll leave you with this last slide, and what this, and now it's kind of a little bit difficult to kind of read through, but what I've done is I've taken a look at just some of the ones that we talked about today, and I pulled out percentage of the dishes that we're seeing on menus in each of these categories, right? Appetizers, entrees, sides, desserts, and beverages. And you can see for all of the grains up here, with the exception of chia, although it's still, I think, is pretty much the biggest one. For the most part, they appear in entrees. But you'll see that certain ones skew a little bit higher for some of the other categories, right? So cornmeal and quinoa skew a little bit higher for appetizers, barley likewise. Side dishes, you'll see grits, brown rice, and whole wheat, a little bit more in the side dish realm. The only one that plays, and this is why I included chia in here, in beverages is chia. So if you think about it, we talked about that kind of variety pack of whole grains that the operators are asking for. I think this is a great chart to look at because if you're getting all those different types of grains, you want to make sure that you're going to be able to use each one of them. And why not kind of spread them across the menu? So look for applications for those particular grain products in beverages or desserts, someplace that you might not necessarily have considered for them in the past. So why wouldn't you have cheesecake with a whole grain crumble on the bottom versus the traditional graham cracker? So there's again lots of opportunity to spread the products out across the menu and carry with it those benefits that consumers are looking for. So I think that's all I had. I've got some other slides in here in the appendix, but I think I'm out of time, right?
Yes, but we can take a question or two really quickly if someone has a pressing question. Jose?
Hi, Mark. Just one question.
Sure.
Do you have any information about the perception of people about a grain with gluten or this? Well, is it still a trend, all this gluten-free food?
We do. We have a lot of data on that. I don't, fortunately, have it off the top of my head, but gluten-free is still a trend, although I think the demand for it is not growing as much as it was. And we do expect that it will tire out at some point as, number one, people realize that, gluten-free stuff doesn't taste as good. And so we'll start to see more and more. But as long as there are solid gluten-free options out there, and I think we highlighted a bunch of them, I think people are still interested in pursuing that. So it's not growing like it was, but it's still popular.
Yeah, I'm going to interject one thing. One thing that we've been seeing is that even though people are starting to realize that only a very small people have a medical reason to eat gluten-free, because we're getting away from wheat being synonymous with grain and getting into discovering all of these other grains, and most grains are gluten-free. If you're saying, okay, sorghum's up, buckwheat's up, all of these things, is it because people are looking for gluten-free, or is it because people are looking for something interesting and tasty, and these happen to be gluten-free? So we have to always wonder when we look at this type of report of where is gluten-free going, is it just that all of us are saying, wow, there's this whole universe of grains out there, I want me some, and I don't give a darn about gluten-free. So there's that too.
So I think, yeah, to your point, Cynthia, the emphasis shouldn't necessarily be on gluten-free. That's definitely a factor for some of the dishes, but why not emphasize the taste? I think that's the better way to go.
Mark, staying on the topic for just a second, I saw only 7% of consumers avoiding whole wheat. So how concerned should we be about gluten-free?
I don't know that we necessarily need to be all that concerned. Are people concerned about gluten-free as a trend? I'm not sure if
it's a noisy 6 or 7%.
Right.
So
yeah, it is a very.
We are
noisy.
concerned in this room,
Yes.
but it is reassuring to see those percentages.
Right.
And yeah.
I do think that people are concerned with gluten-free because I think there's a health halo, right? If it's
Sure.
gluten-free, I'm going to eat healthier, I'm going to feel better about myself, and I think in the end it goes to that higher order benefit that the consumer's looking for to feel good about what they're eating and providing for their family. So I know we've done some proprietary research, and we just found out that there is a portion of consumers that are absolutely looking for gluten-free, and those would be millennials.
Yes. There's no question that there's a demand for it. I'm not so sure that there's if it's completely science-based or if it's just something that they think it makes them feel better.
And if questioners can identify themselves, please.
Hi, I'm Sarah Allen with Compass Group, and I was just wondering, these are really helpful slides with the recipes and everything. Are they going to be made available to us?
That's a question for Cynthia and Kelly.
As Sarah mentioned this morning, we will make the PowerPoints and the videos that our wonderful AV crew is doing available as soon into October as we can get it done. Okay, we are all set. Thank you so much, Mark.
Great.
That was really very interesting.
Thanks, everybody.